Sexual Trauma 101 is a presentation developed by Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response. No part of this presentation may be transmitted, reproduced, distributed, or adapted without obtaining written permission from STAR. Today we will inform you about STAR, define sexual violence and sexual trauma, identify behaviors and offenses that fall on the continuum of sexual violence, discuss the individual impacts and root causes of sexual violence, and identify ways you can help prevent and intervene in sexual violence. During this presentation, we will discuss situations of sexual violence, which can evoke a range of emotions and may have an impact on you at some point, whether today or sometime in the future. Know that STAR is available for support. You can reach us at 1-855-435-STAR. First, let's talk about STAR's work. Our mission is to support survivors of sexual trauma, improve systems response, and create social change to end sexual violence. We believe every survivor has the right to confidential and competent services regardless of their background, gender, race, ethnicity, ability, financial status, gender identity, immigration status, or decision to report. STAR's roots date back to 1974, where a group of committed volunteers began speaking out about rape in the Baton Rouge community. As a result, the Rape Crisis Center was started in 1975 as a governmental division of the East Baton Rouge District Attorney's Office. In 2012, the organization transitioned into a nonprofit, non-governmental organization called STAR. We've grown and expanded to serving 3 communities in Louisiana. Our offices are located in Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. STAR provides supportive services to primary survivors support systems or secondary survivors, as well as provides community education to youth, adults, and participates in social change work in our communities. STAR's services to survivors are broken into 3 distinct programs: advocacy, counseling, and legal services. Our advocacy services include 24/7 hotline support, accompaniment to the hospital and criminal justice appearances, case management, and safety planning. Our counseling services include individual and group support. Our legal services include representation in legal matters resulting from a sexual assault. STAR also works to create social change. We seek to engage community members to reduce rates of sexual violence perpetration by providing community outreach, youth and adult education, and consulting services for businesses. Now that we know about STAR, let's review definitions and prevalence of sexual violence. What comes to mind when you hear the words sexual trauma and sexual violence? For most people, they think of things like rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse, molestation, sexual harassment, and human or sex trafficking. We define sexual trauma as a survivor's experience of sexual violence, which can include a range of feelings and emotions causing ongoing distress. Sexual violence is the act of violating another's sexual boundaries or denying someone's right to sexual boundaries through force, intimidation, coercion, manipulation, or other abuses of power. Rates of sexual violence have reached epidemic levels. 1 in 6 men, 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 2 trans people experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. It is also important to note that in 2018, only 29% of rapes and attempted rapes were reported to the police in the U.S. Next, let's discuss the continuum of sexual violence. This continuum identifies the behaviors, offenses, effects, and root causes of sexual violence. First, we'll look at behaviors. Non-consensual sexual comments, comments about a person's appearance, and questions about a person's sex life are related to the offense of harassment. Non-consensual flashing and public masturbation are considered obscenity. Non-consensual peeping, harassing calls, texts, or emails is considered voyeurism, stalking, and cyberstalking. Non-consensual touching, fondling, groping, or grabbing is battery and sexual battery. Non-consensual penetration, whether attempted or completed, and being made to penetrate someone is rape and attempted rape. Non-consensual sex work and sexual slavery is sex trafficking. As the continuum moves to the right, the level of violence in these behaviors and offenses escalates. It is important to remember that each of these behaviors have one thing in common. They are non-consensual acts that cause harm to individuals. The emotional impacts of sexual violence on individuals can range from feeling powerless, unsafe, embarrassed, worthless, or anxious, just to name a few. There are many root causes of sexual violence. They include individual attitudes, community norms, and institutional level breakdowns. First, individual attitudes that perpetuate sexual violence include those who lack understanding about healthy sexuality and sexual violence, have unhealthy and/or harmful ways of coping with negative emotions, believe they are entitled to sex and/or another person's body, disregard consent or others' boundaries and interactions, exploit the vulnerability of others, lack empathy for others, and question or challenge survivors' accounts of violence and blame them for what happened. Communities that perpetuate sexual violence include those that do not teach people about sex, sexuality, and healthy relationships, view sex as taboo and shameful, glorify violent sexuality, blame victims for the violence committed against them, do not challenge oppression and power imbalances, tolerate sexual entitlement and boundary-violating behaviors as normal, treat weaknesses and vulnerability as worse than committing violence, and view it as acceptable to use dominance, power, control, and violence to achieve objectives. Institutions that perpetuate sexual violence include those that do not have comprehensive systems to address sexual violence, lack policies and processes to hold perpetrators accountable, and lack policies and processes to support survivors. While we recognize that sexual violence is a systemic issue, we also know that individuals have the power to change our culture. How can you help prevent and end sexual violence? Let's talk about a few ways. You've already taken the first step by educating yourself on the definitions and prevalence of sexual violence. Continue educating yourself by seeking more information through STAR's website and social media sites. Next, always believe and support survivors. When someone tells you that they were raped or sexually assaulted, knowing how to respond is critical. A negative response can worsen the trauma and foster an environment where perpetrators face no consequences for their crimes. When someone discloses to you, start by believing instead of questioning or doubting. Prioritize consent, open communication, and respect for sexual boundaries with your partners. Consent is an agreement between participants to engage in sexual activity. Verbally agreeing to different sexual activities can help both you and your partner respect each other's boundaries. Next, take action by challenging harmful attitudes and beliefs and speak up when witnessing boundary violations. This could include speaking up when you hear someone blaming a survivor for rape, or checking in with someone if you notice they are uncomfortable in an interaction. And finally, hold people accountable for committing violence, not for experiencing it. Remember that survivors are not to blame for sexual assault or rape. Instead, focus your attention on the perpetrator committing this harmful act. Thank you for taking the time to join us today and learn about STAR, as well as the definitions and prevalence of sexual trauma and sexual violence, the continuum of sexual violence, and ways you can help prevent and end sexual violence. Connect with us through our website at star.ngo or like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also consider making a secure online donation to STAR so that we can continue our work. Thanks for joining.